Boy, you better get that out of here. Today we're gonna be checking out some scary human experiment stories. One scary thing is that you have not clicked the subscribe button. So please, if you haven't done it, just go ahead, click the subscribe button. It'll really help the channel grow. And yeah, comment down below something scary. Haunted houses, report cards, your face. Let me know. And let's go.
The harbinger experiment. Warning, this story gets a tad bit disturbing, so if you're sensitive to stuff like that, now is the time to exit.
Okay.
The harbinger experiment is a creepypasta story about tests done on 3 subjects to prove that supernatural phenomena exists. As you probably already guessed, these tests go extremely wrong. The experiment was conducted by a scientist called Zimmerman. He had 3 other scientists helping him with this project, one of which is the narrator of this story. In an underground chamber, as you can see, this is the entrance depicted here, Zimmerman had lured 3 test subjects into the testing building where they were each placed in their own separate confinement chambers. They were lured there under the belief that they would be engaging in a harmless isolation experiment. After the test subjects arrived, they were injected with a substance that Zimmerman had created. Little did they know that this substance would turn them from humans into monsters. Part 2's in the comments.
Part 2's in the comments, part 2's right here. Up your butt. No, I'm kidding.
This is part 2 of the harbinger experiment. The point of this experiment was for Zimmerman to summon beings, creatures if you will, from another realm to enter the bodies of the 3 test subjects. On the first day of the experiment, after the 3 test subjects were all put in their separate confinement chambers, Zimmerman held a meeting where he got on a loudspeaker and began chanting. Nobody knew what he was saying. It seemed as though only he knew what he was saying, and whatever he was doing seemed like a ritual of sorts. About 5 minutes after the chanting began, the ground started shaking violently, like an earthquake. And then everything stopped, including the security cameras. You see, they had set up security cameras in each of the confinement chambers so that they could monitor the test subjects. And all of the cameras went to static. Shortly after this, the test subjects began screaming for their lives. The screaming didn't stop for hours. It was time for the team to leave, and they were ordered to return back at 10 a.m. What they saw when they returned back horrified them.
Wait, girl, you can't keep cutting it off, man. Just do it all in one part. That's what she said.
Now's the time to make sure that all of your lights are off, because it's gonna get real spooky. When everybody returned at 10 o'clock the next morning, the security cameras were still all static, except for number 2. The security camera in test subject number 2's chamber showed her lifeless body. After waiting for a while, number 3's monitor turned back on, showing that test subject number 3 had turned into a humanoid. His arms now stretched down as far as his knees. There was nothing human about him anymore. He was now a monster. The security team decided to go into his chamber, and that's when he got violent. He attempted to ambush them, which resulted in the security team unaliving him, which meant that test subject number 1 was the only one left. Suddenly, in the underground chambers, music started playing. The music was coming from test subject number 1, who erupted out of his chamber, quickly unaliving everybody in his path. He was easily 10 feet tall, maybe even 15 feet. People tried to run, but in the end, they couldn't.
Dang, man, are you serious? I swear, did this really happen, man? I mean, this is some Stranger Things stuff right here. And girl, what's going on with your face? You look like you got a fart, bloated, too much Taco Bell. It's okay, we don't judge.
In the video, you can see how her spirit gradually comes out of her body. Creepy, right?
Ugh. You good? Oh, you can see that moving. Oh, heck no. Girl, go back to your body. Your body misses you. Ugh. Or it's just gas. Like, it was just gas coming out of her mouth and she breathed it on everybody. And like, you know, that's what was floating around, you know. Yeah, that's my explanation and I'm sticking to it. Sticking to your mama.
This is one of the worst experiments ever conducted in the United States on people. It's the Tuskegee experiment. In 1932, 600 black men were recruited for a study in Alabama by being promised free medical care. 399 of these men were suffering from syphilis, a common STI, and the study promised medical care for the rest of their lives. But that's not what happened. Secretly, the study was designed to track the full progression of the infection, meaning that the subjects were not given real medicine. Instead, they were given aspirin and mineral substances. The progression of syphilis is terrible, and many men in the study went blind and insane. Meanwhile, researchers were watching this happen and did not intervene. Probably the worst part of this entire study was that in 1943, while the study was going on, penicillin became the most common cure of syphilis, but because it would have interrupted the study, none of the men were given it. The study was shut down in 1972, but at that point, many men had already lost their lives. President Bill Clinton formally apologized for the study in 1997, but for many, it was too little too late.
What? Girl, you can't be ending your videos like that. Saying, oh, it was too little too late. And why did you crop yourself right in between grandma and grandpa? You're just a floating head, girl. Come on. You insensitive. How dare you? I swear, just like white people having to be in the front. 5:30 a.m. Something unexplainable happened. I was just going to check my... Well, okay. Oh, your reflection ain't moving, girl. Look at it! Oh, now it moves. You gotta let it load first. This girl's lagging in real life. Yeah, it's time to move. Go to a different house, move to Afghanistan. Anywhere besides that. Get rid of the mirror. The mirror's busted. It's not y'all's fault. It's just a bad mirror. Or y'all been worshiping Satan and now your reflections don't work.
Okay, so since everyone literally requested this today, we're going to be talking about the Russian sleep experiment. So in the height of World War II, Russian scientists wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. And in order to do this, they decided to test the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. They rounded up 5 prisoners of war and were like, hey, if you do this, we'll grant you
She
your
looks
freedom.
like she'd been
They
deprived
put
of
them all
sleep.
inside of this sealed glass chamber that would continue to release this stimulant gas that would keep them awake. And apparently this gas was still in the experimental stages, so they didn't really know what would happen with it. But they were pretty confident that it wouldn't kill them at the least. So they begin, and the first 3 to 4 days goes pretty great. Everyone's overall pretty optimistic, pumping the gas, the prisoners are staying awake. But day 4 is when they started to see a pretty big change in their subjects. The subjects went from small talk to talking about really dark things like their traumas. They started to complain about the experiment as well. And on day 6, the participants actually stopped talking to each other entirely and even got paranoid. Each of them segregated themselves off in their own section of the chamber. A few of them began to believe that they could sell out their comrades in order to get out of the experiment. They tried to get each other in trouble, but the researchers didn't care. They were just there to observe. But on day 9, things took a significant turn whenever one of them just started screaming and running around. Went back and forth across the chamber for about 2 to 3 hours until he was just making a squeaking noise. And it was later found out that he had actually torn his own vocal cords from screaming so much. And the other subjects did not react to this whatsoever. Instead, the other participants reacted by ripping out parts of the books that were given to them to entertain them during this experiment. They soaked them in toilet water and started to place them over the glass so that the researchers could no longer see in. And you're gonna be shocked by what happens next.
Ah! And she can't do it in one part, but oh well, guys, I guess we'll have to watch part 2.
Part 2 to the Russian sleep experiment. So there's wet paper completely covering all the windows in the chamber. Their vision is completely obscured and it's been silent for about 3 days. I don't really know how this works, but I guess they were monitoring the oxygen consumption in the room and they could still tell that there was about like 4 to 5 people still alive in there. But after this 3 days of silence, they concurred that either the microphones were broken or something was extremely wrong with the subjects. Either way, they were gonna have to get into the chamber. They decided to use the intercom and were like, hey, we gotta get into the room. Everyone needs to lay on the ground and comply. And if you comply, then one of you gets to be free. Well, one of the subjects ends up hopping on the microphone, verifying that it wasn't broken and states, we no longer wish to be free.
What?
So the researchers being like, okay, they're alive and I guess the microphones work. We'll just continue the experiment. Well, the silence continues up to the 15th day, and on the 15th day, the experiment is over, so they go ahead, turn off the stimulant, and turn on the fresh air. And this is when they hear the subjects not only start screaming, but start to beg for them to turn the gas back on. And while they're begging and pleading, the researchers open the chamber. And what they find is straight out of a nightmare. They had turned on all the water in their bathrooms and had completely flooded the room to about 4 inches. And the participant who had died had chunks of flesh taken from its leg and from its chest. This was used to also jam the drain in the center of the room. The other 4 subjects in the room seemed to have chunks of their flesh missing as well, but it was self-inflicted. And their food storage hadn't been touched in days, so they were eating themselves. This story gets way more shocking.
In part 3.
So this is the last part of the Russian sleep experiment. So even though the experiment was up, none of the subjects even wanted to leave the chamber, and they all wanted the gas turned back on. So they made the decision to send some soldiers in to go get them, but one of them reacted so violently that he bit the soldier in the neck, and the soldier bled to death. Another subject ruptured his spleen in the process of trying to move him and also bled to death. So now they have 2 casualties, but finally they're able to get the other 3 out. They immediately take them to the hospital because they're emaciated and they have severe injuries from the chunks of flesh being gone. The first one, who was the most injured, was immediately brought back to surgery, but it seemed as though the sedatives weren't working on him. It does absolutely nothing, and he just keeps begging for the gas. They administer the anesthesia, and somehow this starts to make him even stronger, so much so that he actually rips a leather strap that was keeping him down on the bed. They give him 10 times the usual dose, and he falls asleep and dies. So they move on to the next, which was the guy who tore his vocal cords, and he obviously couldn't speak anymore, so he was just shaking his head no as they approached him with the anesthetic. He starts to fight back, but then gets so exhausted that he actually passes out, and the second he passes out, he dies. So now there's just one left, and since they keep dying, they decide to give in to what they want, and they put him back into the chamber and turn the gas on. As they're prepping him to do so, they put an EKG on him to measure his brainwaves. And this is when they realize that he actually flatlines each time his eyes close. So each time he blinks, he actually goes brain dead. And before they can get the gas back on, he falls asleep and dies, and nobody really knows what killed him. So obviously, if you guys grew up on creepypasta, you know the story really, really well. And you know that it's fiction. But the thing is that during this time, there were so many different unethical human experiments going on. And we've talked about things like Project MK Ultra on here before, so it just doesn't seem that far off that something like this would happen. So as wild and as scary as it is, there might actually be some truth here. Let me know what story you guys would like me to talk about next.
Wait, that's the final result? This whole time, man, she was telling this story, I was waiting on for her to look like half her face burnt off or like something. But instead, she just looks, like she's ready to go out to the club or she's ready to work at Hot Topic. But yeah, the Russian sleep experiment, man, trying to keep people awake does not work. Just let them sleep and then they'll be fine.
The Russian sleep experiment.
Ugh. That's terrifying, man, because you can just tell all they want to do is just go to sleep and not be in an experiment like a dang lab rat.
Most Evil Experiments, Part 13. The Rawalpindi experiments were a series of trials in the 1930s in which British scientists tested the effects of mustard gas on over 500 Indian soldiers in the military installation in Rawalpindi in modern-day Pakistan. The aim of the experiments was to see what the correct dosage was to be used in battle. The soldiers, who wore shorts and cotton shirts, were placed in chambers before coming into contact with the highly carcinogenic mustard gas. Many of the soldiers suffered severe burns and had to be hospitalized, and the effects led to many of them suffering severe depression. However, as no records were kept, the long-term effects are unknown. When asked, the Ministry of Defense could not say whether the Indian soldiers were volunteers in the experiment or were forced.
They were forced. I'm pretty positive they were forced. Everything during that time was forced.
The Craziest Human Experiments, Part 5.
You experimenting with not shaving? Okay.
From 1913 to 1951, eugenicist Leo Stanley was chief surgeon at San Quentin State Prison. He believed that the effects of aging and decreased hormones contributed to criminality. He began transplanting the family jewels of younger men to older men to restore their masculinity. He first began by using the ones from executed prisoners, but supply ran short. He then switched to directly implanting the jewels from deers and goats right on the
testicles.
And when that had complications, he began to grind them up into a paste and inject them directly into the abdomens of prisoners.
Ew, man. Well, good night. Sleep tight. Thanks, bro, for leaving us with that. Now we'll be able to have good old nightmares. That's disgusting, man. Yeah, so if you guys meet a scientist, don't trust them. You never know, they might want to try to experiment on you. But if you enjoyed this video, then go ahead, give it a like. And yeah, I'ma see ya in the next one. Peace.